Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the narrated, not the popular opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today we're getting down with the sickness with director Zack Snyder's zombie remake Dawn of the Dead on the latest Don't Look Back, coming up right now. For this director, the end of days is where it all began, opinion nerds. I'm not a big fan of horror movies. As film experiences, I don't tend to find them all that rewarding, but I do understand the appeal, and I'm honestly down for anything that seems like a genuine work of artistry. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised that many of the filmmakers I greatly admire, like John Carpenter and Robert Eggers, have done their time in the horror movie trenches. Now, I'm a great admirer of director Zack Snyder because of the way he handles more fantasy-oriented material, like his adaptations of superhero comics and his movies like Sucker Punch and Legend of the Guardians. But before 300 and Watchmen led me to an understanding of what a Zack Snyder movie was like, and without even realizing it, I was already hopping aboard the Snyder train, all because of a film that I was in no shape to see that turned out to be one of the best film experiences of my life. Some say it's his best film. Some say it's his only good film. Either way, it's one of the few horror experiences that I've returned to more than once, and to me, that means something. In the early 2000s, producers Eric Newman and Mark Abraham hatched a plan to produce a revamped version of director George Romero's mall-walking 1978 zombie classic Dawn of the Dead. The duo set out on a mission not just to remake the film, but to reimagine it for a more contemporary audience, focusing on a younger generation that might not have been familiar with the original work. This new movie would retain the basic premise of a group of people trying to escape a zombie apocalypse by hiding out in a mall, but other than that, it wouldn't be beholden to the original. Writer James Gunn was brought on board to pen the screenplay, which was later to be refined by writers Michael Tolkien and Scott Frank. Newman and Abraham hired a young Zack Snyder to direct, bringing him out of the world of commercials and music videos and into features, and Snyder brought cinematographer Matthew Leonetti into the mix to help him find the best way to realize his intended look for the film. On release, many of the criticisms fell upon comparisons to the original movie, or at least to what people believed to have been present in the original that was somehow absent, and saying that Snyder didn't understand the original film despite the fact that he didn't write it. This would become part of an unfortunate pattern in director Snyder's career, where he would take on adaptations and approach them in a manner that didn't sit well with some fans who would then harshly criticize him for his lack of reverence. Working from a heavily modified version of Gunn's draft, apparently there was a little too much weird shit in it, the film mostly revolves around Sarah Polley's Anna Clark as we follow her from one end of the experience to the other. There's no attempt to connect the immediate events of the film with anything happening in the world around it, no concerns for finding a cure to this plague of the undead, speculations on how far the damage has spread, or even for how it began. The movie spends its first few minutes developing a sense of mundane normalcy for Anna before forcing her face first into the screaming maw of chaos as this zombie outbreak bursts like a wildfire around her. We pick up events with hints that the outbreak has already begun, and not long after, director Snyder uses the flipping numbers on an alarm clock like a green light at a drag strip signaling the race is on. From that point, the film heaves to full speed, dumping Anna right in the middle of the insanity literally outside her front door. She quickly joins a small group of wandering survivors and makes for the local mall where the majority of the film takes place. From there, the plotting will bring all the action to the survivors, save for the rundown to the finale. This works for the film because it's not a tale about a gang of survivors scraping about while escaping on a road to nowhere, but a group of people forced together by circumstance just trying to find a way to make it all work. The film's cast of characters is designed to bring together a cross-section of personalities, people, and agendas, minor as they might be. They may not be unique, but all the characters are distinct with no sense of overlap. The cast covers a fairly broad swath of humanity with little reliance on stereotype. Note that I said little reliance, not a complete absence of. There isn't a lot of room for development or arcs, so after a certain point where the characters realize their situation isn't going to get any better, everyone, save for a few, starts looking for some sense of normalcy and camaraderie. The movie doesn't have much time to spare and a lot of characters to deal with, so arcs, such as they are very shallow. The only character to experience any distinct growth in all of this is Head Mall security guard CJ, played by Michael Kelly, who transitions from alpha male right-wing asshole to not quite that after what seems like a few days locked up in the mall's holding cells reading women's magazines and learning about relationships. For the rest of the characters, the concern seems to be not losing a sense of who they are amidst the chaos, and all of them continue to act in character even when it becomes a hazard. These are more shift arcs if they are anything. The characters don't change in total, they only experience a change in their status quo. It's a pretty goddamn major change, but the severity of the change has no bearing on the application. It's easy to poke a finger at and pick apart the relatively shallow character work, but as we've said before, you have to find a film's intent and cast your analytical net into those waters, not the waters you wish they were. While the film isn't simply an exploitation piece, it isn't meant to be a deep exploration of character, and wishing that it were so is not valid criticism. The focus of the film is on sharing the subjective experience of the characters during this period. They act as our gateway to that experience, while they also function as a showcase for how different types of people might react to this very absurd and terrifying series of events. To be able to put things like that into context isn't always a skill we have on hand, so there are times it's best to let a film settle on you for a while before you try and discuss it. Though Snyder had been developing a distinct visual style through his commercial and music video work, something that drew the producers to him as a director, the film offered him an opportunity to really expand his approach. The film has a very high contrast and saturated look with deep shadows that fall off into the middle distance and interiors, usually shot with shallow depth of field to separate the characters from their environment. This approach to rendering the image would go on to become somewhat of a hallmark for director Snyder, who does seem to favor this as a way to create depth, much like a classical oil painting. To reinforce our entry into the subjective experience, the camera is used to bring us down to the level of the action. There are, of course, wide and establishing shots to provide a sense of location and scale, but for the most part, the camera is concerned with you, the viewer, sharing the character's experience through close proximity. As would become his way, Snyder's camera is constantly moving, but this is not simply to track the action. There is a sense of dynamism added to the shots, and when the camera moves, it does so to keep you in the character's emotional space. This is not just to show you what they're doing, but so that you can continue to share the experience with them as opposed to simply becoming an observer. This was a mass audience's first exposure to director Snyder's use of slow motion and close-up. Even as a fan of the director, I admit it's sometimes difficult to decode his syntax for these tools on a film-by-film basis. Snyder's use of slow motion shifts between a more traditional application meant to extend a moment and create tension, and a more impressionistic approach whereby you are slightly removed from reality and put into an altered headspace. His use of close-up can also serve to both punctuate a moment and deliver information. In editing, they can seem almost like a rhythmic strike, no doubt a technique he picked up in his music video days. Neither of these techniques is something the director invented, but when he and D.P. Leonetti combine the two, it creates a more surreal experience that can be sometimes off-putting and difficult to contextualize, making them seem like needless affectations. Even I will admit there are a few shots that just seemed extraneous, and I found myself muttering, "Just get on with it." From this, I get the impression of a filmmaker looking for his voice, and while I don't feel all the shots land in this film, by the time of his adaptation of Frank Miller's 300 in 2006, he had refined this technique considerably. In my opinion, the reason some of these moments don't land as well is because overall, the movie aims for a greater sense of reality that makes the surreal moments seem out of place, even in a film about a zombie plague sweeping the planet. Now, don't mistake it, there is a difference between approaching something as if it was real and approaching something with a sense of realism. In this case, it means approaching everything, be it character interactions, character development, interacting with the world, or when portraying violence, as if trying to make them believable within the context of the world as we understand it. The last point is an important point to keep in mind, as the director has, over his career, been accused of glorifying violence by being so direct and blatant with it, generally treating these depictions with a much more brutally direct approach than his more stylistic method in regards to other aspects of storytelling. But there is an honesty in the brutality that, over the course of his career, becomes more clear once one stops assuming that he just gets off on depicting scenes of gore and mayhem. Violence is horrible, but it's more horrible to pretend that violence has no consequences. To portray violence as cool or beautiful, as writer Matt Larkin puts it, makes it seem heroic as opposed to a sometimes necessary evil. So unlike a Sam Raimi Evil Dead 2 approach, or even a John McTiernan Die Hard way of seeing things, Snyder's violence is straight to the point, brutal, and as graphic as he can get away with to emphasize how terrible it is. While many saw this as a boon to a film like Dawn, it has since been seen as a negative point in his continuing filmography. However, it is a viewpoint I feel I can get behind. As much as I'm entertained by movie violence, I can see the point that says just because you must have it does not mean you have to make it seem desirable. This film has also been accused of being nihilistic because we find that, despite their best efforts, none of the characters survive the film's events. Because there is no sense of respite or release from the film's darkness, the audience can feel as if it has been led on a pointlessly dour journey. Director Snyder has been accused of many things as a storyteller, and chief among them is that he is somehow a cruel or uncaring person because of how he chooses to treat his characters. However, lamenting the fact that the characters do not triumph in the end is to miss the point of the film, in my opinion. Nihilism, in short, is the belief that life has no purpose and that ultimately nothing we do matters. Our systems of justice and morality, even the tenuous social contracts we maintain, serve no purpose because life is inherently meaningless. The very idea that the film is nihilistic is contradicted by the fact that the characters, when faced with the reality of their situation, try to regain some sense of social normality and stability. And when given the opportunity, they choose to embrace the hope that there is a place they can escape to that's better than their current status quo. Despite all the awfulness that befalls them, the people we join in this terrible situation do not succumb to their worst instincts or lose their humanity like some of the characters in The Walking Dead do. They stay true to who they are, and a couple of them even manage to find a little growth along the way. This could easily have been a film about a group of characters who push away and try to fuck each other over, but it isn't. The characters stick by one another. They open up emotionally to one another, they support one another, and they even make heroic sacrifices for one another. Even some of the mistakes that get made, ones that cost others dearly, are made from a place of love or care. Some may not see it this way through all the muck and gore, but there is a genuine affection for humanity on display that says no matter how terrible the circumstances, we find the goodness in each other and in ourselves. I don't know if this is the movie's allegory or not, but it sounds pretty fucking good to me. Okay, so here's a story that my wife won't let me finish this piece without telling. In 2004, my wife and I just started seeing each other seriously on our way to what has so far been a very successful partnership. At that time, I wasn't in the best place emotionally, and as such, I tended to ignore my health on all fronts, most especially sleep. I was almost perpetually sleep deprived, and though I usually managed to deal with it in a way that might have cemented my reputation as a dyed-in-the-wool asshole, I was at least functional. But this night was different. I was at the bottom. I was burnt and spent and exhausted. I'm also not a big fan of so-called horror movies, as they rarely work for me beyond a base, visceral place that I'm not fond of visiting. So, making use of my rapidly dwindling faculties, I thought it was a good idea to take my girlfriend to see a horror movie because I was under the impression that she liked that kind of thing. While she handled the movie like a champ, as she's always been my rock, I was completely bulldozed by it. The film got right up on top of me in the worst way, and I was taken by every jump scare. I was thwarted by every terrible turn and undone by each emotional beat. By the end of the film, I felt unmade and emptied out, and that feeling lingered with me, but not as long as the mocking I still receive from her about it to this day. And not an opportunity seems to pass by that she doesn't remind me of the one time a zombie movie got the better of me. All said and done though, almost 20 years later, totally worth it. Dawn of the Dead is seen by many as director Snyder's best work. It's also his least complex work, narratively, textually, and thematically, so I think there's a correlation there. I don't know where people thought he would go from there with his already challenging to decipher visual syntax and unflinching eye towards graphic violence, but if you had told them in less than 10 years he would be making a Superman movie, they would have laughed your eyeballs out through the back of your skull and then had you locked up where your mounting insanity could pose no threat to either yourself or anyone else. What I like about the film, as I like about all of Zack Snyder's films, is the sincerity of it all. Yes, there's humor, but it's never at the expense of the audience, the characters, or the world of the film. I've long since grown weary of this self-referential, self-aware approach that says we can't have fun with genre films unless we grant tacit acknowledgement that whatever we're seeing is all a bit silly. I, for one, refuse to do that. While I personally feel his best work was still yet to come, as a fan and analyst, you can see a solid foundation of director Snyder's approach to storytelling being formed. I've never seen the original Dawn of the Dead, and that's probably for the best as far as evaluating this film goes, but I would hope that I could keep the two as separate entities in my head. I think it's a fine piece of work that, if you haven't yet, you should probably see once before you die. And if you don't, that's fine. Just wait till after and see it then. This has been the narrated, not the popular opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.